The morning the bulldozers rolled down my private driveway, I was halfway through a cup of coffee that cost more than the HOA's entire annual budget. The sound of engines echoed across the lake, deep and metallic, like thunder trying to warn someone too proud to listen. I walked out my balcony, robe still on, hair a mess, and saw the bright orange machines rumbling toward my boathouse, escorted by 3 board members in polo shirts and matching smug grins. At the front of the convoy was her, Marla Grayson, HOA president, self-appointed guardian of community standards, and my least favorite flavor control freak. When she saw me step outside, she cupped her hands and shouted, "Mr. Reed, we've issued you 7 notices for delinquent HOA fees. Since you refuse to comply, we're reclaiming your property." Her tone had that brittle kind of authority people use when they've already lost control of the situation. I laughed, out loud, because that was the funniest thing I'd heard in years. "Marla," I called back, "you're demolishing the house that owns your HOA." That made her blink. For a second, she looked like someone had yanked her Wi-Fi router out mid-meeting. Then she doubled down. "We have full authorization," she snapped, waving a thick folder in the air. "Your arrogance won't save you this time." I took a sip of my coffee and said, "Oh, sweetheart, you might want to check who signed the deed before you start the engines." They didn't listen. They never do. To really understand why that morning turned into the most expensive mistake of their lives, you have to know how I ended up with an entire neighborhood in my name and why the HOA never saw it coming. It started 5 years ago when I bought the Lake Mansion, a massive glass and stone fortress perched on the shore of Lake Wendell. The community was called Silver Point Estates, a gated collection of McMansions populated mostly by executives, retirees, and Karens with too much time. When I bought my place, I wasn't even looking for luxury. I just wanted quiet, a view, space to breathe. The place came with an HOA membership, which I ignored because the first meeting invitation had mandatory written in Comic Sans. My first encounter with Marla came 3 weeks later. She showed up at my door, clipboard in hand, sunglasses too large for her face, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they were auditioning for a toothpaste commercial. "Welcome to Silver Point," she said with the practiced smile of someone who practices her reflection every morning. "Just a reminder that all residents must comply with community standards. We notice your mailbox isn't painted the approved shade of dove gray." "Yeah," I said, leaning on the door frame. "That's because my mailbox isn't a metaphor for my personality." Her smile twitched. "Excuse me?" I pointed at her clipboard. "You're free to write that down if you'd like." That was the beginning of our Cold War, or as she liked to call it, maintaining property value. Over the next few months, I got violation notices for everything from my lawn being too green, unnaturally vivid, to my boat dock being architecturally inconsistent. It was harassment dressed as bureaucracy. I ignored them all. Then one day, a certified letter arrived claiming I owed $14,870 in unpaid HOA fees, fines, and assessment penalties. The problem? My house wasn't technically part of Silver Point Estates. See, when the developer built the community, my lot was carved out as non-restricted waterfront property. It sat adjacent to the HOA's land, close enough to be confused, but legally distinct. When the original developer went bankrupt, I quietly purchased not just my property, but the remaining undeveloped lots, including the legal rights to the HOA's governing land. In simpler terms, they paid me to exist. But Marla never got that memo, and I never corrected her. Watching her spiral over imaginary power was far too entertaining. Then came the day she pushed it too far. I returned from a week-long work trip to find notice of property lien, signs staked in my front yard, and construction cones blocking my driveway. A backhoe sat idling near my fence. My security cameras showed HOA workers breaking open my gate, measuring my patio, and snapping photos of my violations. It was trespass, plain and simple, but I decided to let them dig their own graves a little deeper. I called Marla, calm as ever. "Hey, got your little decorations out front," I said. "Cute touch. Want to tell me who gave you permission to enter my property?" "Mr. Reed," she said, voice dripping with smugness. "We're well within our rights. You ignored multiple certified notices." The board has voted unanimously to seize the property for non-payment. Seize, I repeated, almost laughing. You think the HOA can seize a house? Legally, yes. The bylaws. Marla, I interrupted. You're quoting bylaws from an organization that doesn't exist without my consent. She paused. Excuse me? I smiled. Don't worry. You'll understand soon. The next morning, I filed a complaint with the county sheriff's office, reported property damage, and sent my lawyer every recording, photo, and voice memo I had. Meanwhile, I let the HOA keep digging their financial grave. Marla, in her infinite arrogance, held a community emergency meeting where she proudly announced they were moving forward with demolition due to persistent non-compliance. Which brings us back to that morning. The bulldozers, the coffee, the absurdity of it all. I could have stopped them right then. I could have called the cops and ended the circus before it began. But watching them cheer as their machines clawed at my driveway was worth every cracked tile. The excavator's arms swung toward my boathouse, shattering the glass facade like ice. Marla stood there, hands on her hips, smiling like a queen watching a coronation. Neighbors gathered behind her, recording the victory on their phones. That's when my phone buzzed. It was my attorney. Ethan, he said, voice urgent. Tell them to stop. Right now. Too late, I said, watching another window explode. Do they know what they've done? Not yet, I said, sipping the last of my coffee. He exhaled. They just demolished their own governing property. You own the HOA land, every foot of it. Technically, they just vandalized their own headquarters. I watched Marla's face as a police cruiser turned the corner, lights flashing, sirens silent. The bulldozers halted mid-motion. Officers stepped out, walked over to me first, nodded her, and started taking my statement. Marla's confident posture crumbled like wet drywall. She tried to approach, waving her folder again, shouting something about authority and non-payment. The officer raised a hand and said, Ma'am, this gentleman is a registered owner of this land, including the HOA office property. You'll want to contact your attorney. The color drained from her face. As they cuffed her foreman for trespassing and property damage, she turned to me with this wild, trembling fury. You can't do this, she screamed. You don't control this community. Oh, Marla, I said, finally smiling. You've been living in my neighborhood this whole time. The look on her face was worth every penny. But that was just the beginning. Because within 48 hours, the HOA's collapse triggered a chain reaction that exposed a lot more than power-hungry board members. It revealed why Marla was so desperate to control me in the first place. And when I found out what she'd been hiding, it changed everything. The morning after demolition, the lake was glass still, except for a reflection of the chaos left behind. My once pristine boathouse looked like a war relic. Splintered wood, shattered glass, a mangled dock half submerged in the water. You'd think I'd be furious, but honestly, I was calm. Too calm. Because I knew the real demolition hadn't even started yet. Theirs was coming next. Marla spent that entire morning pacing in front of my wrecked driveway, barking into her phone. I could hear fragments through the open window. No, it was authorized. The board voted. I don't care what the deed says. Stop calling it vandalism. Every syllable dripped with panic. Her perfect world, the one she curated with lawn ordinances and driveway color codes, was cracking like my broken windows. Around noon, 2 county inspectors arrived, followed by a man in a navy suit, my lawyer, Brian. He didn't waste time. He walked right up to Marla and handed her a bright yellow envelope. Cease and desist. Effective immediately. You and your association are prohibited from entering, disturbing, or managing any property within Silver Point Estates until ownership is clarified by the county clerk's office. She stammered. This is absurd. We are the Silver Point Estates Association. Brian adjusted his sunglasses, utterly unfazed. Not according to the county records. The land this HOA sits on, including your clubhouse, pool, and common areas, was purchased by my client. He gestured toward me 5 years ago. You've been illegally collecting fees and enforcing rules on private property you don't own. The inspector started taking photos of everything. The wreckage, the bulldozers, even the HOA notice signs littering my lawn. One of them, a middle-aged guy with a notepad, asked, "Did you authorize this demolition, sir?" I nodded toward the machines. They didn't even ask for a key. He scribbled something down, frowning deeply. "That's going to be a mess." Marla's voice wavered. This can't be real. We've been operating for years." Brian's tone was calm, surgical. "That's what makes it fraud, Mrs. Grayson." Her face went pale. She clutched her phone like it was a lifeline and stormed off toward her SUV. I watched her speed down the hill toward the HOA office, which, ironically, was also on my land. I turned to Brian. "So, how bad is this of them?" He smirked. "Bad enough that the words criminal liability are going to ruin her next manicure." What followed over the next 48 hours was pure theater. News vans started showing up by day 3. Apparently, word had spread fast that an HOA had accidentally demolished property belonging to the owner of their own land. A local station even ran a headline that read, "HOA demolishes millionaire's mansion, discovers he owns the HOA." Neighbors started avoiding me, not out of anger, but confusion. One couple, the Langleys, approached me hesitantly one evening. "We didn't know she was lying," Mrs. Langley said softly. "We thought the HOA was legitimate." I shrugged. "You were paying into a fantasy. Happens all the time." Mr. Langley frowned. "So, does that mean our dues?" "Gone." I said, "Marla's been funneling the money through an unregistered management company. She wasn't funding community improvements. She was paying herself." Their faces went blank. The truth was uglier than I expected. Once Brian and I got access to financial records, it turned out Marla had been running what was essentially a suburban Ponzi scheme. Fake landscaping contracts, inflated maintenance fees, phantom vendors. Every month, thousands in resident dues flowed into shell accounts linked to her husband's consulting firm. She'd built her power on intimidation. Compliance letters, threats of liens, and fake legal jargon. Nobody ever checked because no one ever questioned her authority. She was a queen of her tiny kingdom, and fear was her crown. But the thing about people like Marla, they never stop digging, even when they've hit the bottom. 2 nights after the news broke, I was out by the lake cleaning up debris when I noticed lights on across the water. The HOA clubhouse. I had given anyone permission to be there, so I grabbed my flashlight and headed over. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the place was a disaster. Papers everywhere, filing cabinets open, trash bags filled with shredded documents. And there she was, sitting at a desk, typing furiously on her laptop, working late. I said, leaning in the doorway. She jumped like she'd seen a ghost. "You can't be here," she snapped. "This is private property." I grinned. Funny, I was about to say the same thing. Her eyes darted between me and the laptop. "You don't understand. They'll ruin me if this gets out." "Marla," I said, walking closer, "you ruined yourself. You've been stealing from these people for years. You demolished someone else's property. What did you think would happen?" She stood up, trembling. "You think you're the hero here? You don't even care about this community. You bought it like it's another trophy on your shelf. I built it. I gave people order, purpose. You gave them fear," I interrupted, "and they paid for it." Her expression hardened. "You think this ends with me? You have no idea what you've stepped into." That line stuck with me. The way she said it, like she wasn't bluffing. I grabbed a laptop as she tried to slam it shut, then left before she could call the cops. That night, I scrolled through her files. Hidden folders, encrypted spreadsheets, offshore accounts. It wasn't just HOA money. She was laundering money for someone else. Contractors, developers, even a few political donors. This wasn't a neighborhood scam. It was a front. And suddenly, her desperation made sense. She hadn't gone to war with me over ego alone. She was protecting a pipeline that funded half her life. The next morning, the police raided her house. She was handcuffed on her front lawn in full view of the neighborhood she'd once ruled. Her husband tried to shout about wrongful arrest until an officer read him the list of charges: fraud, embezzlement, destruction of property, wire transfer violations. As they loaded her into the cruiser, she caught my eye. "You think you've won," she hissed through the open window, "but you've just inherited a nightmare." The words lingered longer than I wanted to admit, because she wasn't bluffing this time. That night, Brian called. "Ethan," he said, "I've been reviewing the ownership structure. You might want to sit down for this." "Why?" I asked. "Because in purchasing the developer's holdings, you didn't just buy land. You also inherited every outstanding contract, lien, and obligation tied to Silver Point Estates, including their debts." I laughed, but it wasn't funny. "How bad?" He paused. "North of $8 million. And some of the creditors, they're not the kind of people who wait for payment notices." The line went silent for a long time. Outside, the lake shimmered under moonlight, calm as ever, but I could feel it deep in my chest. The real storm hadn't even started, because Marla might have been gone, but the people she worked for were still out there, and they just lost their favorite cover story.